In early 2017, reporters covering the Trump White House encountered a lot of chaos. It seemed like President Trump at the time was a total outsider adjusting to Washington, and there was acrimony at times among those who were at the highest ranks of his White House staff. Will there be a repeat this time around? Well, Susie Wiles, the incoming White House chief of staff, told Axios, "My team will not tolerate backbiting, second-guessing, inappropriately, or drama. These are counterproductive to the mission." That's what she told Mark Caputo. Let's bring in our political panel, Kadia Goba and Molly Ball. Kadia is a political reporter for Semafor. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Great to have both of you here. Kadia, let's begin with you. Susie Wiles is now installing all of her allies inside these key White House positions. Is this her White House? And if you cross her, watch out?
I mean, I think if you talk to anyone in the incoming administration, they'll say that Susie Wiles is a steady hand and she means what she says. However, I would argue that she doesn't have total control of the incoming president because the problem is that he will have certain allies that will have access or untethered access to him, and that could be problematic. Those are the issues that she's going to have to worry about. Obviously, she will, try to guard him, I would imagine, but there are different people who have different access to him, and that is probably what brings the chaos.
Molly, you wrote a terrific book about former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. You heard her comments on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan talking about how Democrats are going to handle this crossroads for their party and the incoming Trump presidency. What's your latest reporting on her and Democrats as they look toward the inaugural address of Trump and everything to come?
Well, former Speaker Pelosi, of course, is no longer the leader of the Democratic Party, but I think what you heard from her there has always been her perspective that the proper way to be the sort of loyal opposition is to oppose where you see fit, particularly when it comes to making the argument on policy. And that was what we saw the Democrats under Pelosi do during the first Trump administration. We see the Democratic Party now trying to be much more careful, much more deliberate, and to really pick their battles more than they feel like they did in 2017. Not necessarily Pelosi, but the Democratic Party writ large was in sort of full resistance mode during the first Trump administration. They opposed absolutely everything about him, and many of the Democrats who would go on to run for president in 2020 prided themselves on having, for example, voted against every single one of his cabinet nominees. There's a sense now that, first of all, his victory this time was much more decisive, but second, that they don't necessarily gain anything by being seen as hysterical and just going against everything for the sake of opposition. So I think we are going to see a Democratic Party that tries to be much more judicious, and thanks to the narrow margins, particularly in the House, the Republicans are going to have to work with them at least on some things. So they will have some leverage, and they will have a voice in the coming months and years.
Kadia, is the Republican Party fully united now on its strategy when it comes to legislation? There has been debate about whether to put everything in one big bill, the border legislation, couple it together with the tax legislation and make it all be able to be passed through what's called reconciliation or a simple majority. There's also been talk about splitting it into two because it's going to be too complicated to get a consensus on some sort of massive bill. What are you hearing behind the scenes?
I think some of the murmurs you hear right now, as you point out, that Republicans are split on how they'll move forward. This is sort of an indication about what is to come. I do not think as far as my reporting, they do not have a consensus on how they're going to proceed with the administration's agenda. But I think some of that has a lot to do with people coming from the administration, the incoming administration, and how they are posturing or talking to certain reps or maybe talking to the Senate and not necessarily the House. So they are House divided. What at hand right now, House Republicans feel like they need to do one all-encompassing bill because they fear they won't be able to push through Trump's tax agenda. If they split it, they feel like the best option is to combine that with immigration so that it is a sweetener already at hand. So they don't have to worry about some of the holdouts who think that a massive tax plan is just too expensive. So that's kind of what they're up against. It's going to be interesting. With a small majority, everyone has an opportunity to break ranks with the party, and it'll be interesting to see how they accomplish this.
Molly, what's your assessment of the difference between now and 2017, not just in terms of Susie Wiles, but the whole Trump operation?
As I wrote about Speaker Mike Johnson last week, the vibes are better, but the math is worse. You have a Republican Party right now that is as unified and confident and optimistic as I have ever seen it in my decades of political reporting. On the other hand, they do have very narrow margins in Congress, much more narrow than they did in 2017. So it's going to be much harder, to Kadia's point, to get anything done on a party line basis. The major accomplishment of Trump's first year in office, if not his entire first term, was that 2017 tax cut bill. And they lost several Republicans on that bill. They're now trying to do something much bigger and more ambitious, and they cannot lose literally a single vote, at least as currently constituted. So while the Republicans, I think, are much more unified and confident and focused, and you have a Trump administration that's also far more focused and intentional in the way that they've been going about this transition. On the other hand, there are so many obstacles ahead for this agenda that they want to accomplish because of the legislative math in Congress. And for that reason, I think you're going to see most of the action in the coming months be on executive orders, on foreign policy, on things that Trump can do without Congress, because it's just going to take a long time for Congress to get going to where they can actually get started on passing some of this legislation.
We'll have to see what happens. I know you'll both be reporting on all of it with excellence. Kadia Goba and Molly Ball, two of the best. Thank you. We appreciate it.